I think when the tide lifts all boats, everybody looks the same.
Yeah.
It's only when the tide disappears, like comes down, that we see who's been swimming naked. For me, faith is like an anchor because it's choppy waters out there. There's oftentimes storms that we face.
Yeah.
And that anchor allows us to be grounded.
Sam, good to see you.
Great to be here, Justin.
I personally was a little bit curious because even though, you're a mentor and a friend, I haven't really heard the story of why you chose to leave a huge job, right? CEO, CIO of Morgan Stanley Management in Asia, do that sort of 0 to 1 thing, which, as I firsthand know, it's pretty brutal.
Well, first of all, I'm surprised I never told you the story. But I guess it was a bit of a journey. It wasn't like I left Morgan Stanley, the CEO, CIO title, and then suddenly jumped into this entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
It was kind of an accidental journey towards entrepreneurship. And so I was always an investor primarily, though I ran the business. When I transitioned out of the company, and the reason I left was because I felt that I'd done pretty much everything I wanted to do. Early 40s, I had another 25 years, a quarter of a century, where I can give it my all and do something meaningful and purposeful. But then I chanced upon these two young guys, Yuning and Greg, who's my co-founder, and really have this opportunity to build something so unique, which is really trying to solve the individual's pain point in investing and building wealth, and especially in trying to prepare for our future in retirement, in a way make a dent in what is the global pension crisis, to support the future old age kind of pensioners, which is a massively and fast-growing number of people. And the existing incumbent financial institutions were really not tackling this. In many ways, we're kind of, doing it in the wrong way, to the detriment of, investors and clients and their best interest. So I felt that we needed to change this. And so that mission and purpose is what drove me to become an entrepreneur.
When you were at MS, I assume the client base that you were serving is quite different from the client base you're serving now.
Yeah, for sure. There is a massive contextual change, right? But what was the desire of building Endowus is to offer the institutional setup that I had at Morgan Stanley. And we wanted to offer that kind of endowment, institutional investing to individuals. So in a way, we're bringing the best practices to, maybe retail investors that may not fully appreciate it, but we know is actually a significant improvement to the services that are being provided. And convincing people that actually this is a service that is needed in the market. And that's, for any startup, that's a huge challenge, right?
I'm sure taking anything from 0 to 1, especially in a business like this where there's regulation, right? There's stakeholders that you need to bring to the table. There's talent that you need to bring in, right?
Yeah, I mean, ton. As you know, there's a ton of challenges going from 0 to 1. The biggest challenge has been, is especially because we're a direct-to-consumer, is always trying to manage the cost of acquisition. And, scaling the business in the right way. That's always the balance that is the most toughest thing as a startup, because we have limited resources. And no matter how great venture funding environment was, that just led to greater competition. And I think when the tide lifts all boats, everybody looks the same. It's only when the tide disappears, like comes down, that we see who's been swimming naked. And therefore, the guys who weren't doing it in the right way kind of slow down, disappear. We have scaled much faster because in a way we've done it in the right way. We're a fiduciary that serves the best interest of the client. Doing it in the right way allows us to ride out the cycles and continue to grow in what's been a very challenging macro environment, especially for the financial markets.
Absolutely. And I think that we saw a lot of companies take that shortcut, right? Sell a dollar bill for 90 cents type of growth, right? Where the unit economics were sort of
50
distorted.
cents,
50 cents even, right? 20 cents even. One of the things that you and I have talked about is when it comes to leadership, there are no shortcuts.
The focus on people is critically important because any direct-to-consumer service company, it's all about the people. When it comes to financial services, it's all about the people. And it doesn't matter whether it's a startup or a fintech. It doesn't matter whether it's a bank or an asset manager. It's all about the people because the capability and the talent is what determines the outcome. For me, I don't think there was a massive transition, but there was an adjustment. And I think what's the most important principle in all of that is not to try to copy others or say that, hey, Morgan Stanley, I did it this way. It's really trying to approach everything from first principles. What is best for us at this stage of growth?
Yeah.
Who are the best people for us? And what are the most important roles that we need to fill? And how do we allow them to do their best work in this environment? And so the people will change. So some people will come and then they'll go, and maybe they'll come back, and allow each individual to really do their best work so that the company can achieve its goals, the mission as well.
Yeah.
But one other really important thing from first principles is alignment. So align to the best interests of our clients as a fiduciary to serve our clients, our partners, but also our employees. And if they're not aligned, then it's difficult. It's about delayed gratification, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you give up certain things, the short-term gains for the long-term gain, because you're in it for the long term. So I think that different perspective is necessary for people to transition. A lot of people wanted to come to fintech or startup, but they don't reconcile this.
To your point about that short term versus long term, at a startup, you always need to grow. But sometimes I, as a leader, struggle with managing my team in terms of balancing that short term results versus the long term sort of approach that you need to take.
It's tough, and it's always a balancing act, right? I think the role of the leader is to not be focused on many things, but identify what is the most important thing. Right? As a startup founder, especially when you're venture backed and you have you're beholden to investors, and that's the balancing act. I think the different stakeholders have different needs or different goals. If you have great investors who are aligned, again, it's about alignment. If you're aligned to that long-term vision and they can stick it out, then you don't have this conflict as much. But if you do have that, short-term minded, subset of your team, and you have an investor that is short-term, then that's the source of a lot of the conflict that we have.
Yeah, and now that Endowus has gotten bigger, you can't be everywhere. You and Greg can't be everywhere, right?
No.
You probably have to empower others to kind of drive this alignment.
Yeah. First of all, we have a very strong bench. So whether it's C-suites or heads of business units or divisions or teams, we've been very grateful to have them join us and then continue to grow the business together and lead the teams. What's been working for us is empowering everybody to really step up in the past, let's say 2 years. Leadership development efforts, whether it's training. I think Hupo has been very helpful for us as well in that regard, and just getting them to take on more responsibilities and learn from each other.
Yeah, I don't think it's easy, right? Because ultimately, even though you have a strong bench of leaders, all of them are different.
I think most people have this single picture of what a great leader is, because each individual leader at different stages of growth with different responsibilities. But oftentimes the diversity of those strengths and weaknesses is what makes the whole stronger. Each of them bring different things to the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And especially at a startup, I think that, in a way, those kind of broken pieces actually come together to create a beautiful work of art.
Yeah, well said. You've spoken publicly about this story of how you were faced with a really interesting dilemma. You'd been looking forward to this promotion for a long time. It was sort of put in front of you, and for whatever reason, you chose to forego that and give it up for someone else.
Yeah, there's multiple dimensions to this. At that point in time, I had to make a choice, right? Either I get promoted or my best friend at the time and my partner in crime and colleague and, one of us has to not get it. It's any human being will be challenged with that. But the desire was to look a little bit beyond just this year, right? If I don't get it this year, maybe I can get it next year. And also, we have to work together. We're the leaders in the team, and we all succeed and we do really well. So is it really important to get that title this year? Or is it better to build an amazing team and a great culture with somebody I really like and I love working with? I'm happy to, as a friend, to, defer that decision. I did get promoted the next year. And in fact, when I was up to be the CEO of the company, he was my biggest supporter to take on that additional role.
I think that's so admirable, but also really tough. Say it's like 30 years from now, right? And you'll have grandkids by that point.
Hopefully, yeah.
Say you're with your grandkids and you're telling them the story about your professional career, right? What are the key takeaways you want them to have?
That's a tough one. I mean, there's so many things that you can think of, and I want to try to avoid the obvious kind of,
Yeah,
generic kind of comments. For me, what remains is the relationships. Our relationship is more important to me than, what I get out of you and what you get out of me. That's how I always approach any kind of relationship. And in that relationship, you can't have a hidden agenda. I feel that, if I'm genuine with a person, then they'll see that is genuine. And so for my children and my grandchildren, I think they value relationship above all things as the greatest kind of asset that they can earn through a business career or, even social and family relationships, right?
I think you reconciling that with another point you made earlier about mainstream standard like ideal of what the modern leader should be, right? I was reading this book that I found really interesting. It's called How Will You Measure Your Life? It's by a Harvard Business School professor by Clay Christensen. Every year he sees his peers getting promoted into new roles and so on and so forth, but every year he sees that, for example, their family relationships are getting worse. And his conclusion is that people who subscribe to this mold of always doing deals, always producing results, and everything is short term.
Yeah.
Family relationships or child development, that stuff takes decades. If I, spend the next hour playing with my kid or working with my kid, helping them with their homework, I'm not going to actually see the tangible fruits of that labor until decades later. What is really interesting in your story is that you've been able to kind of lean into that longer term view. This might be a little bit of a tricky question, but do you think that's because of your faith? And I'm also curious how faith has played a role in your business career as well.
Well, first of all, Professor Christensen, two of his three sons I've met, they actually are Mormons. So it's interesting you brought faith into this perspective because I don't think it's about me being a Christian or them being a Mormon. For me, faith is like an anchor because it's choppy waters out there. There's oftentimes storms that we face. And that anchor allows us to be grounded. We're not shaken or moved around because if you have shifting priorities and shifting values, then it's a very, very painful thing because psychologically you're always going to be stressed out. But if you have firm anchors, then there is kind of like this underlying peace underneath the waves above the deep sea that allows you to make the right decisions and put the right priorities in place in your life. That was my experience too when I was going for worldly success and promotion and a bigger bonus in a financial institution. I had to make sacrifices, and those sacrifices oftentimes hit the most important relationships in your life, which is your wife, your kids. I was much more intentional about balancing that. Having said that, it's difficult. Being an entrepreneur is all-encompassing. So you're never going to get it right. So don't stress about getting it right. Do what you can in the spaces and the opportunities you have. And be at peace with that is what I could say,
Sam, thank you for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Justin.